Are we ready? It's already going? Huh? Hey, this is Uncle Bryan's Stories Worth Repeating. I'm so glad you joined me. I got caught off guard here. Welcome. Today we're going to hear a fantastic story about onions. Onions. Do you like onions? I don't like onions. Well, my wife makes them okay for me and I eat them, but if you were to give me a chance of biting into a great, big, beautiful onion like this, I'd think you're crazy. Crazy. Fruit Loops. But that's not what the story's about today. This story comes to us from Uncle Arthur's Bedtime Stories again. I hope you're enjoying these stories together. And Otong, you're going to help me today a little bit. You guard the onions, okay? Got it? Understood? All right, very good. So this story goes all the way back in time to a time in the United States history, a long time ago, before we had cars, before we had electricity everywhere and telephones and things like that. You had circuit riding preachers. These were people who would get on a horse and they go from town to town and they would be doing the baptisms and the communion and the preaching, and they would help care for many families all over the place. And their territory would stretch for long distances. So you can imagine. This story is about one pastor by the name of Pastor Matthews. And he rode a horse. You can see the picture here of him on a horse right there. Yeah, you see the picture of the horsey? He would be riding on the horse for days. He would travel hundreds of miles that's right, my cameraman is using a particular side. That's right, he'd be sore and he'd be on his horse going from place to place. And sometimes he would be gone from his home for 2 months. 2 months at a time. That is horrible. But he was so committed to sharing the Bible with people that he was there to serve, to help them with their baptisms, with communion, with dedicating their babies, and praying for the families and the church members. And so he would travel. Well, Pastor Matthews, at home, he had 12 children. 12 children. That's a lot of kids. Well, so they had a big family. And so his wife and the children, they would keep everything going when he was gone. And sometimes when you're gone that much, it gets hard. Hard for the whole family. Can you imagine? 12, I don't know how many babies do orangutans have, huh? That's something you guys could look up on Google or something maybe later. Wonder how many. I don't think they have a whole lot. I think they're a little bit closer to smaller litters. Do you know, Otong? Do you know how many? No? How many kids do you have, Otong? You're stuffed. He doesn't have any kids. Okay, but so imagine their house doing all these things. So Pastor Matthews was out, and finally one time he came back after being gone for quite a while, and his oldest son named Jack, his oldest son had not done something he was told to do. And Pastor Matthews was not happy about that. And so they had some strong words, and he said, Jack, I told you to do that. You need to take care of that. And probably Jack argued back, because it's hard when mommies and daddies are separated for a long time. Sometimes the family has to just kind of take over and do what they've got to do. And maybe Jack began to think he was the man of the house, because he kind of was when his dad was gone. But when his dad came back and said, I expect you to do that, and Jack did not submit himself to his father. He kind of argued and pushed back and was disrespectful, and there was some disrespectful words said, and probably before it was over, Jack probably got a spanking. Ow! Ouch! Spanking. And Jack did not like that spanking, and he said to his sister, who was about the same age, he says, I am leaving this place. I am sick and tired of being here with Dad and him doing all these things and going and then coming back. And she says, I'm out of here. She said, no. Elsie is her name. She says, no, Jack, don't go. Don't go. I wish I could go, but no, don't go. He says, I'm going. There's nothing you can do to stop me. I am taking my stuff. Don't tell anyone. I'm leaving tonight. And sure enough, It was sad. But the next morning, the family woke up and Mom was making breakfast and she said, "Everyone come down and eat." And all of a sudden they realized there were only 11 children. No more Jack. During the night, Jack had taken a few things and he had disappeared, and no one knew where he was, except probably Elsie, but she wasn't talking or sharing. And of course, Mom and Dad were very, very sad, and all the rest of the children, "Where's Jack? Where's Jack? We miss Jack." It was really sad. And so the family was not so happy for quite a while. And I imagine at some point, Pastor Matthew still had to get on his horse and go ride off and try to bless other families, even though it was hard at his own home. And so he would do that with a heavy heart. And when he finally came back, still no Jack. And while he was gone, Elsie was getting more and more angry. Angry with her parents, angry because Jack was gone, angry because she was there still, and she'd lost her smile. No more happiness. And every time people would ask her to do something, she would not hardly say anything, never be smiling. And in her mind, Elsie was thinking, as soon as I can, I'm leaving too. My parents, what they did to Jack, what they're doing to me. And sometimes teenagers can get certain things in their heads that aren't always true. But they feel it, and boy, those feelings are strong. And so they just kind of boil, and Elsie was boiling. And sure enough, one day, Mom was cooking, and she said, "Elsie, Elsie." And Elsie came around the corner. She said, "Elsie, no one else is here to help me. Can you please go to the barn and climb up to where we keep the onions, and please bring me a couple of onions, maybe even half a dozen. Thank you." No, Elsie didn't say anything. She didn't say yes, ma'am, or yes, mom, or nothing. She just kind of went there. No one else was there to help. And so she went out of the house, shut the door, and went walking towards the barn. And as she got to the barn, she went on in, and she climbed up the ladder, up to the second layer where they usually would keep things stored, and she went and she grabbed some onions. Otong, I'm taking your onions, okay? So I only brought 2 onions. But she grabbed about 6 onions, and just as she's getting ready to go back down the steps, she heard a sound. It was someone else. The door opened to the barn. There were some heavier footfalls, and then someone was coming up the steps to where she was. And she didn't want to see anybody right now. She didn't want to talk to anybody. And so she looked very quickly, and she saw there was a door that was up against the wall so that she could hide. And so she crouched down behind the door as close as she could, and so that no one could see her. And she was able to hide there behind the door. And while she's hiding behind the door, she looks out as close as she could, and she sees it's her dad. Her dad! And her face almost made a grumbly face. I mean, I don't want to talk to my dad at all. And she was still angry at him because of what had happened with Jack, and Jack was gone. And so she's sitting there just seething anger, teenage anger, and all these things. Oh. And then she saw something strange. She didn't know what was happening. She thought maybe her dad would talk to her, but he didn't talk to her. He didn't see her. All of a sudden, she heard this big sound. And it was the sound of his 2 knees hitting the ground. And then she saw she had his Bible. And while she was there, hiding behind the door with her onions, she heard her father begin to pray. I'm going to put the onions over here. Because her father began to hold the Bible and on his knees to cry out to God and say, "Oh God, please help us. Please help our family." And he went on to confess. He has said, "Oh God, please forgive me. I was angry that night with Jack. I've driven him away. I don't know where he is. Please forgive me. Please let him know that I still love him." Oh, and her father poured out his heart for Jack, and then prayed for Elsie. "Oh, Father, I've noticed that Elsie's heart is turning cold and hard. Please help her know how much we love and care for her." And then he went to pray for all of his other children. And finally, as he's praying, pouring his heart out before God. He's an honest man. He made mistakes. We all make mistakes. But he was an honest man, and he's pouring his heart out to God. Finally, Elsie could not hold it back anymore. She heard all the prayers, and her heart began to melt and open up, and she was starting to cry. And finally, she came bursting out from behind the door and says, "Oh, Daddy, Daddy!" And she hugged him. She said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you loved Jack and me and all the children so much. Oh, I love you, Daddy." And right there, they had this incredible reunited time because of the onions. Now, back at the house, Mother is wondering, where did my daughter go? Where are the onions? I need them right now. But before she yelled, she looked out the back of the door and she saw her husband and Elsie walking arm in arm down the pathway to the house. And their hearts were rejoicing. And immediately the mother realized what had happened, and she was so grateful. She didn't mind if she had to wait a little bit longer for the onions. So you can hold them again here, Otong. But you know what else happened? That night, maybe because of the prayers of the father, or maybe because Elsie, who knew where Jack was, I don't know. But Jack came home that night. And the story goes on to say that years later, as their family continued to grow and as their lives grew and changed and matured, Jack became a minister like his dad, and Elsie married a minister. So their father and their mother raised them up in the truth, and they remained. So boys and girls, I hope the next time you see an onion, don't bite it. Unless you really like to. I've been told that there are some really sweet onions over here. I think they're called the Washington Sweets or something like that. Walla Walla sweet onions. Or I've been told that, and people that like them, they can eat them just like an apple. I think they're crazy. But maybe people like that. But the next time you see an onion, I want you to remember the story of Jack and Elsie and their dad. And more than that, boys and girls, if there's somebody that you need to apologize to, or if there's something that's happened, every time you see an onion, and maybe your mom or your dad, or maybe you're cutting the onions and you're starting to cry because the onion juice is getting in your eyes and you're crying, they say you can chew gum and that fixes that. But, sorry, that's an Uncle Bryan tip, they say. But when those tears are coming and when you see those onions, I want you to think about if there's anyone that you need to forgive or anyone that needs to know that you've forgiven them, and to rebuild relationships. We don't want to have our families all split up and torn away. So may God bless you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And maybe I should juggle these maybe another time with something other than onions in case I drop one. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.